My name is Courtney Souders, and this is my assessment project. The assessment that was used was a Q3 math benchmark assessment, and it was online. Therefore, the intended audience for this project are anybody that is directly involved in the decision-making for math instruction at our school, so administrators and our math specialist, and also teachers who are involved in instruction of math for our students. So intervention teachers, general educators, and special education teachers play a huge role. Like I said, the assessment was our Q3 benchmark test. The third graders now started taking the benchmarks on the computer. That only started happening this year. So it is all scored online except for a few problems that are completed on the work mats and also a few problems that are typed in a box online that need to be hand scored. In this particular test, there were 20 questions and 16 of them were scored automatically by the computer, but 4 of them did need to be scored by general educators. In this case, I scored my own class data using a rubric. This test primarily focused on multiplication and division skills as well as fraction skills. This test was a summative assessment, so it tested them for all of their quarterly knowledge and anything they had worked on since about January to March. Overall, my class did really well. Our class average was an 88%. This beat our school's school improvement plan's goal of having 80% of students beat 80% or higher on a test. It also met the county goal, which is that 75% of students will score 80% or higher on benchmark assessments. As you can see on the data table, the blue means that those students are well beyond meeting expectations, which is 21 out of 24 students. The students in the orange are slightly below expectations, and then the student in the red is far below the expectation. Overall, however, every student had increased their score since the second benchmark assessment. I have taken out the names to avoid any security issues, but over here on this data table would show the names of the students. You can see their score, and then an also really unique feature of this program is you can see all the questions at the top. If you pick the play button, you could see the actual question on the test, and this is actually an example of one, is this word problem right here. It's what it would look like to the students. But you could see all of the question numbers and what each student received as their score on that particular question. Continuing with the results, these are some of the positive factors from the assessment. So overall, relative class strengths are fractions, comparing fractions, equivalent fractions, representing them on number lines and models. And here from the data, you can also tell pretty easily what these strengths are. There are all the math standards. These are fraction standards. These are really multiplication division standards. This is an area standard, but it relates to multiplication. It's, again, fraction and then multiplication properties. So we really, the heavy hitting standards my class did really well on, and you can also tell here from the averages that they scored 87% or higher on these standards, some of them even 100%. However, some of the standards were not as successful. You can see from this data that there's a lot more red and some green and yellow going on. These standards related more to whole numbers as fractions, so being able to put the number 4, for example, as a fraction. Two-step word problems, which are a little bit more complex. It's something that my grade has been really working on this year because they're very challenging for third graders. Relating division to multiplication. So those are some of these standards. This 308D8 is that two-step word problem. So you can see 6 students did not get it right at all, and that was a 75% average. And then another low one is 30A2, which is multiplication and really relating division to that. The role of technology played a massive part in this assessment because the entire assessment was completed online, besides a few problems that were completed on the work mat, but even then the students had to refer to the online tool in order to know that they were supposed to provide the explanation on the work mat. For third graders, doing this can be very challenging. It was their first time they've ever taken it online. Using even just the tools that are on the assessment can be hard, and have taken a lot of instruction just to teach them the tools and how they need to show their work on the computer. The role of technology also played in the data scoring part. It was scored almost all through the program, and the teachers had to hand score a couple of the explanations, but it was still entered into the system afterwards. So all of the data was kept on the same program. Unify has an option for you to get a lot of different kinds of data tables from the assessment, whether it's on a specific child, and to see their progression of the standards throughout the 3 units. Comparison between classes. You can even compare county from the you can even compare assessment from the counties, or just your whole class like I had before. You can see individual responses on different problems that they were given. So these data charts are really helpful when it comes to reflecting upon instruction and the decision making that needs to happen after the assessment has been given. Some really important implications to take away from the assessment is all of those areas here that were some weaknesses for our class shouldn't just be ignored. There should be some distributive practice in place from here until the end of the year to really tone in on those areas that the class has been struggling with. Now, this standard looks like almost half of my class either didn't get it at all or didn't fully understand. So this might be a standard that should be practiced as a whole class. But the other distributive practice should be in small groups, and it should be based upon those students that did not understand these particular standards. So some distributive practice, especially in two-step word problems, representing whole numbers as fractions in a relationship of multiplication and division, should be in place. Another important implication is it is hard to tell from this data table without knowing the assessment. But a lot of these questions that my class didn't get right were questions that they had to provide some sort of explanation for. Those explanations can be difficult to get full credit because they have to have math vocabulary, an extensive response that really answers the question. They have to provide reasonings for their answer, so it can be really challenging to get full credit for an explanation type of question, which is where we see a downfall a lot of times. So an implication would be that more instruction should be geared to providing expectations for what should be in those responses, modeling those responses, arguing with specific math vocabulary, presenting math vocabulary, and getting the students to be aware of math vocabulary and use it in math, and just have a lot of opportunity to practice those kinds of explanations. Relative or related to the readings, implications, and this is really going back to what I'd said before, but this was a statement in a reading that I had done, and it basically stated that the individual teacher should gauge how students are learning the material and what decisions need to be made from then, and how to improve their knowledge of those skills. And also for the teachers to reflect on their own ability to instruct the students and what areas maybe I struggled with instructional-wise that maybe impacted the scores in those areas. So this came back to just knowing those learners, doing the distributive practice if they needed help in some areas, making those instructional changes now in the year, but also in the future, and reflecting off of the scores that we received and making changes so that in the future, maybe students will not have weaknesses in the areas that they did. And then also that comparative piece of talking to other teachers to see how they instructed on a particular skill, and making notes and taking advice on how to better instruct certain skills. Another quote that stood out to me was about the effective implementation of assessment through technology. So really this one just talks about how technology does play a massive role in assessment, and it should continue to play a massive role in instruction because it really dramatically increases the time available for instruction rather than scoring. And so I said that less time can be spent on scoring when the assessment's done online. Although we had to hand score a couple of the questions, it really saved time, and we were able to spend more time in meetings just talking about what kind of skills we needed to go back and reteach, or go back with some small groups and really hone in on what kinds of skills we want to improve in the future, like those explanations, and what we can actually do to help model their explanations, and ultimately more time spent on instruction, which really should be the goal. And then finally, here are my reference. So this is my assessment project.